All right, well, I guess it's good morning for you all. It's still morning here also, but a little later. I'm Angela Post, and I'm the Small Grains Extension Specialist here in North Carolina. And so I actually serve in the same role as Amanda does there in Oklahoma. But when we started producing hemp in North Carolina, they came to me because we had quite a bit of equipment available that we could start using to work through these production questions in that crop. And honestly, initially, we really felt like we were going to have a reasonable grain and fiber interest, because the longest running global market that has been stable has been the seed market in Canada and Europe. And so we started there, and quickly in the US, it turned all to CBD, which are the plants that you see here on the screen. And we just had to about face and start working in that crop, or that market class for the crop, essentially. So today I'm going to talk mainly about the types of tests that we've had out for CBD over the last 3 years. There's been 4 years of research here in North Carolina, so we're like a year behind Kentucky and a year behind Colorado for anyone who's looking for other good resources out there. But we also, even though I have, oh, now it doesn't want to advance my slide. Oh, there we go. Okay. So just to give everyone the new contact from North Carolina, I'm happy to answer questions of anything we've done already, but we have hired an extension specialist for new and alternative crops, and he's responsible for hemp, so he's taken over that role. He's been here for only about a year now, so getting his feet wet, and has a season of hemp under his belt as well. So I want to start by talking about a test that we ran all 3 years, and this was maybe something a little bit different than what's being done out in the Midwest, and that's plasticulture versus open bed, and both of them being drip irrigated. So here in the East, we have a lot of tobacco production, we have a lot of sweet potato production, and they tend to bed their land for that process. Sometimes they leave it open, as in the sense of tobacco and sweet potato. But if they're going to grow something like vegetables, you'll see it in plasticulture like it is here. And maybe for Oklahoma, you might only see that way down in the southeast corner where there's some vegetable production there. But we wanted to look at how varieties performed in these two systems, so that we can make a recommendation for growers, which one would be better. Excuse me, I'm just now recovering from COVID, so you may hear me clear my throat a lot here. We had 6 varieties and 4 replications across the state of North Carolina. And just to give you a larger view of what these kind of look like, because it probably looks different than what you see in production out there. This is a wide row plasticulture, as in vegetable production. And then here are the open beds, which are a little narrower. They kind of have a ridge on the top, and this is how they would typically do tobacco production. And they just substituted hemp into this system. So this is more like what you see out in the Midwest, but maybe not in an irrigated situation. It may just be flat, tilted ground where they've transplanted in to the plant. This is about mid-season. So these plants would have been planted in May, and this picture would have been maybe the end of June. And then to give you an idea what the research plots look like for that first year, we tested, again, 6 varieties in here. And you can see the drip tape going down those rows, and then here it's underneath the plastic. So receiving the same amount of nutrition, receiving the same amount of water, just in 2 different types of systems. So that is a larger overview of that test. What you were just looking at is right down here in the corner. Are you able to see my pointer, Brian?
Yes, I can see your pointer.
Just want to make sure everybody's seeing that. So this is what you were looking at down here. In the back, we had our first year of variety testing, which was very small, and our first year of nutrient testing. And then in the following year, that field turned into this field. So research blew up really, really quickly. All 4 of these beds across here are all the variety test in the second year. So it went from 12 lines to 30 lines. and multiple locations. And then we had to move our nutrient testing up here to the corner. And then in here we had various herbicide work and also cover crop work. This up here at the front is all various cover crops and kind of companion crops to look at what growers could do with this in their fields. And then an overview of the nitrogen rate test at one of our other locations. So you can see some plants in here did very poorly where we had 0 nitrogen. I want to talk briefly about nitrogen, and I'm going to go into the results of the open versus closed beds. Basically just because I don't have time to cover every single test we've done, but I do want to give you an idea of what our recommendations look like here. And they match pretty well across the country what folks are putting out there. Excuse me. For floral production, which is what most folks are doing at this point, we have a recommendation around 100 pounds of nitrogen per acre, really regardless of the target end product. So I use this in my grain or seed production tests and also in my fiber tests, but it's the same in our CBD. We put down ours half up front at planting, especially if you're bedding the land, and then the rest as you see fit through the season, but prior to floral initiation if you can. And here's what that looked like in the first year. We went from 50 pounds all the way up to 300 pounds because we had a lot of anecdotal information out there that this plant would respond well to nitrogen and that we would be using a lot of nitrogen, almost like a corn crop. But as you can see, we went from 50 to 100, and after that 100, you really got absolutely 0 difference. This was done with Cherry Mom Cultivar G at one of our sandier locations. And basically, you go up that amount, and why would you apply more if you're not going to be getting additional yield out of that? Here we're looking at dry matter in pounds per acre. This would have been about a 1,500 plant per acre population. So maybe a little bit on the low side for the first year populations, but we were getting just under a pound of dry material per plant, which was our initial target. So that's good. And if we look at the global literature on seed and fiber production, which is where most of the nutrient work has been done, the maximum use efficiency rate is somewhere between 85 and 95 pounds per acre if you do the conversion. So we felt like we were pretty well on the money with 100 pounds, and we've done well with that since then. Since this work, there has been a graduate student who's finished her master's degree, Maggie Short, and another student who's working on fertility work in hemp. So stay tuned, and you'll see lots more papers coming out on that out of NC State. So looking back at the open versus closed bed tests and knowing that that's the amount of nitrogen we used for these, here are the 6 varieties we had in those tests. It run the gamut from long season, late flowering varieties to some earlier ones, and even a dwarf one in here at one point. I'm just going to scroll through quickly so you can see about what each one of these varieties looked like on the, when I say closed bed, I'm talking about the plasticulture bed. This is Cherry Mom. One plot would consist of 5 plants spaced 5 feet apart, and that was replicated 4 times in each location. So Cherry Mom here. Abiotic, which is one of our largest varieties that we grow, and these are just now initiating floral structures. They're at about 50% flower here in this image. Sweeten, a little shorter variety, but not a dwarf, still a large full season variety. Cherry Wine, which is can be fairly small, but it does still close row across 5 feet of row here in a 5-foot spacing. Suver Haze, a little more upright. And then Lifter, which is one of these that has more of a Christmas tree shaped structure. And you may see more of those Christmas tree shapes out in the Midwest. If you visited any farms out there, I tend to see more of that when I was in Arizona and Texas, taking a look at fields out there. So looking at those 6 varieties, just to give you a sense for when they're flowering, these would normally be planted for us in the middle of May, and we would start to see flowering all the way in August. So planting here ranges from May all the way to the 4th of July. But I will say that those folks who are planting in late June and early July are not doing all that great as far as yield. So we like to get that planted just after the last freeze event. And we see lifter and Silverhaze. I want you to remember, I'm going to show this slide one more time, but these two are the earlier flowering types. The rest are later flowering. And all of these later flowering ones are the large ones, excepting one, and you'll see which one that is whenever we see the data. So August 2nd, 50% flowering date versus September 18th, 50% flowering date. So these have the potential to put on quite a bit more biomass than the top two. So if we look at average dry weight per plant by variety, this is across both bed types. There was actually not a significant difference between bed type. I think I have the data where I'll be able to show you between the two different types of beds. But because of that, it's good news for growers, right? They can use an open or a closed bed and get similar results out of each one of the varieties. And also they could save money on cost if they're not needing to use that mulch for weed control, for example. So cherry wine, Bayox, and sweetened all made between 1.5 and 2 pounds of dry matter per plant. Very respectable yields. When we first started this process, most folks were saying, oh, you'll be doing good to make 3/4 to 1 pound per plant. And by the second season, we were consistently making around 2 pounds per plant for the bigger varieties. Then here we have Silverhaze and Lifter, which I already showed you and talked about the earlier flowering date. They don't put on quite as much biomass because they start flowering quicker. So 1/2 pound up to 1 pound out of Silverhaze. And then Cherry Mom in this case ended up being a dwarfed variety that we really didn't know that when we put it in the test. And that's another fun thing that has happened with hemp is, you know, you don't always know what you're getting. So you have to be careful about where you're getting your genetics and what they look like. So this one, while it had a later flowering date, it was a dwarf type. Now, looking at average stem diameter, we took lots of measurements to make sure that the plants were progressing properly on both types of systems. Again, no difference between the two bed types, but those plants with larger stem diameters did result in higher dry weight in pounds per plant. So we see the same Bayox and sweetened for sure, and those are the longer flowering types, but we see cherry wine over here at 31, which kind of came into the mix. This one was kind of a surprise here, but then these over here, Silverhaze, Cherry Mom, and Lifter, about half of the stem diameter, and you've seen that in about half of the dry weight also. So coming back in here and taking a look again, you still see those mid-flowering dates. We recorded these once per week, so sometimes you miss an exact on Julian date, but we try to be as consistent as possible, trying to cover 4 locations. Now looking at dry weight and stem diameter by bed type to show you that there is no difference, because we're looking at the bed type, we're averaging over variety in this case. Dry weight in pounds per plant on open versus plastic beds, basically just right at 1.2 pounds on average. If you look at this variety by variety, it's the same deal. If you got 0.6 pounds for Cherry Mom in the open bed, you got 0.57 pounds on the closed bed. So it's interesting that we saw absolutely no difference there. So also no difference in our stem diameters. And then if we look at plant height, we see the same trend again. Cherry wine, Bayox, and sweetened, those larger varieties were a little bit taller. And we had Silverhaze in the middle, Lifter and Cherry Mom at the bottom. And plant variety was significant, or plant height was significant by variety, but not by bed type. Now looking at height and width, definitely a difference in height between the two bed types. So that was interesting that we didn't see any impact in overall. Open bed, which is the back bed with no plastic, resulted in 11.7 centimeters taller and 8.2 centimeters wider plants, but it did not influence the dry weight for the floral material that was collected. Okay, so looking at the width here again, I'm not going to belabor it. The larger ones were wider. The earlier flowering were narrower. Okay, but anyway, looking back at these, dry weight per plant by variety, these were in a single test. These three in the variety tests, not just in these agricultural tests. So a couple of them stand out, Bayox and Sweeten. So in the variety test, we were able to make almost 3 pounds of dry matter per plant in the 2018. And this is bucked off of the stems, so it does not include the stems. And you can see we were under on our THC levels, so that was good. Very close with the Bayox at 0.26, and Sweeten done very well at just 0.12. You can see the other varieties that were in the test. Cherry wine is another one that was we've already talked about. We made 1 pound per plant on that one in the variety test. Now, what other kinds of testing have we done here, and what would you be able to find if you go to our webpage and look at resources that we have put out there? We have done some population work. Here you can see the different spacings from the air about mid-season. So this is before their closing row. So what you looked at in the images I've shown you already was this 5-foot spacing. I know that's really hard to believe, but at the end of the season, this plant will touch this plant. And the same will be true for all of these other spacings. Essentially, they will just fill the space that you give them. They won't really try to take up a lot more space. So it was about how you want your production to be. In the Pacific Northwest, we see a lot of these 2- and 3-foot spacings. And even in those, we would even have a closer bed. You see all these beds are the same distance apart. We just altered the population inside the row. But many times growers would have a bed spacing that matched their inner row spacing. That's where you see folks talking about sea of green, where every plant touches every other plant, just like you would have in a monoculture corn or soybean field, for example. For those tighter plant spacings, it's possible that you may need a little bit more nutrition to feed them. And those are also situations where you want to plant a little bit later because you know they're going to all touch one another. It just kind of depends on your operation. These all perform well, kind of regardless of variety. So part of it is you just look at the structure, like that lifter that has that Christmas tree shape might do better in a 2- or 3-foot spacing than Bayox, which kind of sprawls and is a huge plant. So just to give you an idea that we have done that kind of work. In the last year of the work that I did, we had 29 varieties in our CBD variety test, and they are all here. So this information is on the webpage for, I think, 3 locations and an average for statewide. What you're looking at here is the statewide average. Bayox right up there at the top. This has been a strong, Bayox and Sweeten both, strong varieties in our trials. I have put these in order by percent CBD rather than percent bucked biomass first, because almost all of the contracts that have been written on our side of the country have had a 10% floor. So if you didn't make 10% CBD, a processor didn't want it. Now they have since come down on that number a little bit in some places, but basically I was trying to identify any variety in our test that made better than 10% CBD, because these down here would simply not get sold in our state in the first 3 years of production. And that encompassed about 2/3 of the lines. So 2/3 of the genetics we were working with could do pretty well, and some of them superb. Then we go over here to the bucked biomass, pounds per plant. Remember, we're looking for at least 3/4 of a pound, ideally a pound or more. And in this particular year, we were hitting that pound mark with several lines: Bayox, Lifter, Suver Haze, and Cherry Wine, and Sweetgrass by Cherry Wine. Those were the ones where we were kind of hitting close to that pound mark. And this is, again, averaged over all locations for statewide. So at certain locations, we would have hit the 2-pound mark on some of these, or the 1.7 pound mark, for example, just depending on where you were in the state and how sandy you were. And then finally, the other information I've provided in these tables is the Delta-9 THC. I provide this because at the time of the testing, we were still using Delta 9 as our sales point. If you were under 0.3 on the Delta 9, it was being accepted by processors. But now that we have the USDA final rule and all the fun that went into creating that, we know we have to pay attention to the total THC. And you can see here, I've highlighted in red all the ones that went over what would technically be over for the USDA final rule. I will say also that this is almost all a product of timing of harvest. If we had harvested a couple of weeks prior, we could have dropped our CBD point a couple of points and been, 12 to 14, and we would have been under in our total THC, because so timing of harvest is very important, and that's some work that we've done also. Down here at the bottom, I have two lines, Brilliance and Relief Now. These should never have been entered into an industrial hemp variety test. You see they went way over the total THC with over 3%. Still not a level that's going to make a standard marijuana user have a high, but should not be showing up in the marketplace anywhere. So I definitely discourage these lines in my area. So just for your future information, to find these tests, all the tests that Dr. Suchoff is putting out, this is our webpage. If you just search hemp and NC State, this is the page that will come up for you. We continuously have news events here. Almost weekly, they're putting up additional news events. And then you have production information and hemp law and regulation, as well as our North Carolina Department of Ag information that you can follow here. I believe this has an RSS feed. If you want to receive an automatic update, if you go to the very bottom of this page, it will, you can put your email address in, even if you're not a North Carolina resident, and it will send you a weekly email saying what's new with our research. So I want to finish up. Brian, am I okay on time?
You're doing great, Angel.
Okay. So I want to finish up by just showing some images and talking about some problems, common problems that we've seen. One of the issues with getting plants in that you're going to grow for CBD is you need them to all be female. Well, one of the number one questions I got in the first year to 18 months is, well, how do I know if they're girls or boys? And many times growers wouldn't know until they started to go into flower. So here's our male plant, and the whole entire plant will be covered in these. Usually the males will flower out ahead of the females, like many of our trees are doing right now. And then here are your female plants. There are some outfits doing screening, genetic screening of these ahead of time in some cases because it's so cheap now. But in some cases, you might still get a small percentage of males in a all clonal line, particularly if your clone, or not an all clonal line, particularly if your seedlings are coming from feminized seed rather than clones. If you are purchasing clones, you should not receive any 100% male plants. Now, you may still receive plants that will throw hermaphroditic flowers or will throw an entire branch that has all male flowers. So that is a genetic change that the plant can control through some mechanism, because we have seen that occur. But if you are getting clones, they should be 99.5% female with a hermaphrodite here and there. And then if you're getting seed, it's possible to get between 1 and 3% males, and you just need to rogue those out very early. Another big problem we saw in year 1 and 2 was root binding. When we're producing these clones or these transplants from mother plants, many people had not done this work previously, or they were producing different types of seedlings in the past, like nursery crops, and they didn't know how early to stick them, how late to stick them, how long they were going to have to keep them in the greenhouse. So the timing of that was very off. And here I have a 30-day clone, a 45-day clone, and a 60-day clone. So you can see the 30-day clone is just starting to get roots at the base of this plug. The 45-day is probably at the point where it better go in the ground, and the 60-day was growing out the bottom of the pot. And we see these will become root bound very quickly, because those roots will kind of start to twist around just like any other nursery pot plant. They'll twist around in the space that they're given, and they actually won't seek out a lot in that bed even if it's well saturated. They will continue to grow in that orientation. And we've seen a lot of late season plant death that was due to root binding only. It was literally choking itself. So we recommend to growers not to purchase clonal transplants that are longer than 30 to 40 days from having been stuck, essentially. Stem splitting, this is something that you guys would be very prone to out there with potential for wind damage, storms to happen over the spring and summer after these plants have been planted. You can see this plant is still doing well. The stem is split. You have the potential for disease to come in at that point. So we've seen plants recover from this, but depending on plant structure, you can see this quite a bit in the field also. Chimeras, not seeing as much of this as I saw in year 1 and 2, but it may still be possible. So I would get lots of pictures like this. Some people are like, what herbicide was sprayed? Some herbicide damaged my crop. But here you can see it, a half of a leaf that's has chlorophyll clearing and the other half is fine. And the plants don't look disfigured or anything. They're just the wrong color. So this is just a variegation, a genetic variegation that's occurring in a certain percentage of the population. Nothing wrong with that plant. It will go on and produce perfectly fine flowers as long as it's not, more than 50% bright yellow, which in case it won't make as much food as it needs. So I purposefully did not cover pests and diseases here. We have lots of foliar fungal diseases that cause issues in hemp. And if it is a worm, it doesn't matter what kind of worm, caterpillar, moth, from moths and butterflies, love this plant, particularly earworms and bollworms really, really love the plant. They come in and get laid there. They lay their eggs and hatch right around the time of flowering, and they will consume large parts of the floral material, which is what you're trying to produce. So keep that in mind. I don't cover that because we have specialists here that also cover hemp diseases and hemp insects. Hannah Burak is covering our diseases, and our pests are being covered by multiple entomologists over in our plant and pathology department. But those updates all make it onto the NCSU webpage as well. And I can answer questions about some of those things if you have them specifically, but with the limited time here, I figured I better stick to agronomics. This is our crew and my contact information. At NC Hemp Talk is what we used to use. If you want the hemp Twitter, now you're going to need to go to David Suchoff's page and find out what his hemp Twitter handle is, because I'm not using this at NC Hemp Talk Twitter account anymore. And that's all I have.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Post. Does anybody have questions for Angela? Remember, you can write them in the chat or talk. Angela, what have you been seeing as far as just production acres? How's that flux been? You basically said you've transitioned from the seed and fiber into the CBD.
So, yeah, we had been seeing, we have over 2,000 growers permitted in our state alone. Acreage wise, across the U.S. in 2019, which was the main year of our huge amount of tests, was around 400,000. I think it's dropped significantly since then. I don't know where it sits right now, but our acreage in North Carolina is still heavy on the CBD side and light. We might have 1,000 acres total of seed and fiber plots at all. I would say at max, so I'm getting a catch in my throat, sorry. Yep. We at max may had 5,000 to 6,000 acres of CBD.
I was going to comment as far as the bedded and the plasticulture. Between the medical and the CBD, I've actually seen quite a bit of plasticulture, most of it on beds, some on flats, majority are on beds with drip. And so I've seen open beds and plasticulture. So that's stretched all the way out to the Northwest.
Okay. I personally, if you have a crew that, there's a few herbicide products available at this point, but if you can manage the weed control, I like the open bed better, particularly the further you move southward in the US, because as we get late summer, those beds stay wet and the soil temperature heats up pretty well, depending on what color of plastic you're using. Even if it's white, you get pretty hot soil temperatures. And we just see a lot more of kind of Pythium and Fusarium root rots, even very late season on those plasticulture beds than we saw in the open beds.
That makes perfect sense. Any other questions for Dr. Post or the group? Angela, if you, I guess, unshare your screen, we'll go into the roundtable. We've had a big, diverse conversation agronomically wise. I appreciate all the presenters. I know there's been some direct messages. I want to just start with Josh. Josh, you had some questions come through via text. Would you mind sharing the discussion? Did we lose Joshua? Okay, well, I will redirect. And let's see here. I already had my plans. There you are. Oh, he's on the phone. Thanks for letting me know you're on the phone, Josh. Any questions for the team on the wheat side as we go through the nighttime temperature? So Krishna, on the nighttime temperatures, is a lot of this work going towards the breeding efforts that we're trying to breed, have genetics that are more tolerant to those nighttime temperatures, as it's not something we can control, or are there management strategies that can be implemented?
Good question, Brian. So at this point of time, all our efforts are primarily trying to go towards the genetic side of things, as I presented, trying to look at those markers which are stable across environments or whatever. But the other thing, when you come to the management, as Amanda and you guys are doing with the nitrogen, so we see a strong interaction with the nitrogen sort of playing a role with nighttime temperature. Although we are thinking of how to deal with this, the one thing that you could do is, we are doing something, I was just typing out to Amanda that we're starting something on the nitrogen use efficiency and the split doses, both aerial and ground-based sensor system. The idea is, if you are able to split your nitrogen well and still retain that functional stay greenness, which can provide that additional carbon that you are losing due to respiration, probably that might help you balance out. So there is an element of management, but I think we are still very early into that. So there is certainly an opportunity, Brian, on that side.
That's fascinating. I'd like to, I have to look at that. We're looking at, and so I want to get into this. And so it would come into, we're doing some work with UNL right now on our delayed nitrogen. So we're really holding off nitrogen and looking at how it impacts physiology, how it impacts maturity and overall quality. There's been current thought that the delay may also increase the AMF fungi relationship with the crop early, and allowing for mitigated stress later, because you don't have the upfront nitrogen. So the crop and the AMF create a better co-relationship through the early stages. There was a question coming in from Davies. Has there been work, and this could be Amanda or Krishna, work on fungicide impact on either mitigating the stress of heat or cold? Amanda, do you have any thoughts as far as fungicide?
Not on those. I mean, we have seen that some fungicide has some effect on the leaf health, like staying green, although we don't recommend applying fungicide for those, but not specifically for that.
And I'd let, Dr. Post, after Krishna, I mean, you're the small grain specialist. You have a lot more fungus in NC State than we do here. So, Krishna, do you have any thoughts?
Yeah, so taking that question, that's an interesting one. I don't have much on the fungicide side, but on the herbicide, safeners is what I want to say. So we've done some work on sorghum because we are trying to move our sorghum planting earlier. So we are trying to look at increasing the chilling tolerance in sorghum here in Kansas, so that we provide a little bit of a wider window for the sorghum producers. So we did try a bunch of 4 of our safeners, where basically we were able to show we took the best of the genetics, because we did a sorghum association panel in 2 different conditions, and we picked the top 5 ones which performed the best. And in that, there was a chromatin, there was a pioneer, and there was one other hybrid. And on top of the best performing chromatin one, we use these safeners, which are in 4 combinations of 4, and that actually bumped up the tolerance, or the chilling tolerance, at the early stage. So what I want to say is there is this opportunity, especially when you said cold. So we have done that in sorghum, and my entire wheat work is on heat stress. I don't do cold, but just I wanted to draw parallels between different crops. So yeah, that's my take on it. So there is opportunity, I'd say.
Angela?
So for, we're talking about fungicide and weed at this point, right? And protectants from, yep. Here, we have had some work done with things like Praxor and some other kind of protected fungicides that they're putting on in the fall to try and utilize those for plant health rather than actual protection from a particular disease pest. And I don't know that any of that has been directly related to looking at increases in nighttime temperatures, but we have seen some, positive increases in tiller counts and things like that with fall applications of that, which are not related to any kind of disease process that's going on in the field. That's probably all I could really say speaking to that, because I just do the screening whenever the disease is present for fungicides rather than trying to work on the physiology of the plant.
Dr. Lofton, I asked you something, but you might want to share your canola PGR work, because this could go back to some of the PGRs and maybe even the PGRs from the fungicide and say, can we use a PGR to yours is more on the cold side, but would a PGR impact cold or heat stress? So I'll let you, Josh, if you want to just share a moment.
Well, you should ask Angela. She started it, but I'll give you the short answer.
Yeah.
Can you use it? No. I mean, so we've done the fungicides and active PGRs, and we've been able to change physiology of the plant, but it's all short term. And specifically on canola and wheat that have a very long growth season, the short term mitigation of growth or what have you never really lasted all that long. So we didn't see a grand value to it, especially when you look at ROI, pretty low.
One other add-on, Brian, if I have the time.
Yeah.
So there's quite a lot of interest in the private industry these days with some of the molecules that have been developed, and they've been testing mostly on horticulture crops previously just because of the cost and not coming into the row crops. But I know now that Valent Biosciences, and there are a couple of folks where the products are pretty effective and the prices have come down. And I'm working with somebody who does carbon nanoparticles where their costs are $5 per acre right now. So we're working with them to try and see if those would be some sort of a way or a mitigation approach where $5 an acre seems to be attractive to a row crop sort of producer as well. So that's going on in the pipeline.
So I'll comment on that, and Brian, we can get into the biologicals as well. Is that it costs less than $5 an acre to put sugar out on the field too, but I think there's a lot of stuff we don't know on active application in the field as far as biologicals, storage, longevity, long-term use, and those kind of things. So I mean, I don't know what we want to talk about that, but getting that kind of same.
We could chase that monkey all day long. I mean, that's why we had Dr. Wilson come in last session, the fall, is talking about, as a microbiologist, talking about she is absolutely fearful of inputting foreign bodies into our soils. It's no differently than bringing kudzu or multiflora rose or sericea in, is that there's always a potential that a foreign microbial body can go into basically a hostile takeover. At the same point, most of my microbiological work, has been not very productive in that most of the biology that we're adding to our soils dies awfully quickly in our wonderful, hot, dry, low organic matter. Our soils aren't built for some of the products that are sold specifically in the Corn Belt. I can name several that have been transitioned into the Central Plains that have failed, and the companies realize that due to either our daytime temps being hot, or nighttime temps being cold, or lack of organic matter. But the natives, it should be more about supporting the native populations and not necessarily the addition of new populations. What can we do to make our natives more successful? Adding organic matter, going to no-till, things of those lines. Josh, can you, any of the private messages that you had, can you discuss some of that conversation you had going about the double crop?
Yeah, I'll focus in on one, since it's still, it's about corn, but there was a question about if we've looked at different trait, like corn trait technologies for this, talking about conventional corn versus the, BT corn versus, the herbicide resistance, what have you. No, we haven't. There was a good conversation about a cost of a corn bag that has the technologies in it compared to a cost of a conventional bag, and the mitigation of risk is a lot less if you don't have to pay as much up front, and there's some value to that. And overall, even though we are running the highest class traits that we can on the corn, we're still getting pretty good earworm damage. We aren't getting the stalk borer damage that some folks think that we should, and if some folks are running some other materials that they are, but in all of our tests, we haven't really worked on that. We're still in the phase on saying, should we even try it? Those kind of aspects of is it even valuable to see as a long-term option? And I think there's some potential to it. I think things like moisture concentration and all that would be a big telltale. I also got asked if a lot of soybean producers will just plant it and either will get a crop or they'll get insurance out of it, because we are getting a lot more counties throughout Oklahoma, Texas, and Kansas that are insurable on a double crop soybean, but aren't insurable in any other double crop system. I don't think you can do that on soybean. You're just getting propped up a lot of time by insurance. But I think that overall, the long and the short of it is that I don't think any of the double crop you can just plant it and just hope that it does. There's a lot of management that goes in, particularly in the back end, so into September, October, November, whenever you start seeing some of the pests that we don't typically see maybe in Oklahoma come up in our full season, we will see them kind of come up a lot more in our double crop because our full season is typically done. We've seen a lot more issues with like pod worms and stink bugs in double crop than we do in our full season. They're a yearly issue, while in our full season, they're a potential issue. So I don't think any double crop should be set it and forget it. That's a good way that you don't get security long term for having insurance. If you get a lot of claims being filed in counties, that's a good way you can see those values go down. And I'm fearful of that this year. I will say, if rumors are right, and I hear rumors of $17 soybean, I think there will be a lot of soybean just put in the ground and just hope that they get a stand and maybe they don't have to harvest. So I'm hoping that that's not true. It's a great system, and it would be great if you had insurance to back that up, just in case you did have a really bad year, outside of your realm of potential.
I know you're limited, and so let's just say I'm asking for your opinion and not data, because I know you don't have it. But your gut, as far as double crop corn and aflatoxin, increased or decreased potential in the same region? Let's talk about the wonderful land of Payne and Noble County area.
Yeah, so in last year our trials, we have the data, and we typically will get less concentrations. We didn't break the threshold last year in either session, but we had a much lower concentration in our double crop. That's the whole intent, not going through that pollination in that really hot and dry conditions are a hope to maybe mitigate some of that aflatoxin. Now, there always runs a risk, and I don't know how much of a risk, but we had fumonisin kind of pop up, what was it, 3 years ago? You know, in cooler and wetter conditions, you know, you can have the fumonisin come up, and that definitely is something that could be a concern, is just any sort of mycotoxin in the corn. I don't know if we'll ever get away from it, but I feel like the double crop is potentially a way to help mitigate it. There's always going to be a risk, though.